Night falls. The stars appear, slowly, as if remembering. Somewhere, in the quiet corners of the earth, traces of forgotten lives still remain. Buried beneath dust, hidden in stone, lost but not gone. These were civilizations that rose in silence and vanished without a final word. But if you listen closely, you might still hear them. A breath, a footstep, a voice carried on the wind. This is where their story begins again. Welcome to part 2 of Forgotten Worlds. Anatolia, modern Turkey, in the late Bronze Age, was dominated by a formidable empire whose name was lost to history until modern archaeology rediscovered it, the Hittite Empire. These people, speakers of an Indo-European tongue, built a powerful military state and vied with New Kingdom Egypt and Assyria for supremacy. At their height, around the 14th-13th centuries BCE, the Hittites ruled most of Anatolia and northern Syria, their kings styling themselves Great King alongside pharaohs and Babylonian monarchs. Their capital city, Hattusa, lies in ruins amid Turkey oaks and steppe grass today, a remote UNESCO site at Boğazköy, Turkey. Wandering through Hattusa's remains, you can still pass through the Lion Gate, where carved stone lions have guarded an entryway for over 3,200 years. Beyond, the foundations of palaces and temples sprawl over the hills, and great earthen ramparts once fortified the city. It was here that the earliest known peace treaty in the world was signed, between the Hittites and Egyptians after the famous Battle of Kadesh, circa 1274 BCE. The Hittites were innovators. They mastered ironworking earlier than most. The word Hittite even became associated with iron in later legends, and their chariots thundered across the plains of Anatolia. They left behind thousands of baked clay tablets in cuneiform script, preserving royal decrees, myths, and diplomatic letters. From these tablets we know of King Shepululema I, who conquered the Mitanni and rattled the Egyptians, and of Mu'atali II, who faced Rameses II at Kadesh. The Hittite state was robust, fortified by a pantheon of storm gods and sun goddesses whom they worshipped in rock-cut shrines like Yazilikaya, and by a tradition of pragmatic governance that integrated various peoples of Anatolia. Yet around 1200 BCE, the Hittite Empire met a sudden and catastrophic end. Hattusa, the great capital, was abandoned and partially burned around this time. Lesser cities across the Hittite realm showed destruction layers or were deserted. The royal archives fall silent. No more cuneiform tablets after a certain point, as if the scribes laid down their style forever. The collapse was part of a larger convulsion that struck the eastern Mediterranean at the end of the Bronze Age. We'll hear more of that soon. But for the Hittites, it meant the complete disappearance of their empire, and even their language for millennia. Later inhabitants of Anatolia, and even the ancient Hebrews, who mention Hittites in the Bible, retained only faint echoes of this once great civilization, not realizing the true scope of what had been. Why did the Hittite Empire fall so quickly? Historians piece together a story of multiple stressors, a perfect storm of calamities. Firstly, climate change played a role. Recent scientific evidence, such as tree ring and pollen analyses, suggests that Anatolia experienced a severe drought in the late 13th century BCE. Crop failures and famine likely ensued, undermining the Hittite economy and the populace's loyalty. One inscription from the reign of the last known Hittite king, Shepululema II, records pleas for grain from distant lands, indicating hunger at home. Secondly, external pressures mounted. Mysterious groups known as the Sea Peoples, seaborne raiders and migrants, were attacking cities throughout the Mediterranean around that time. More on them soon, and could have cut off trade or directly assaulted Hittite territories. In the Hittite provinces, vassal states may have sensed weakness and rebelled. Enemies on the empire's fringes, like the Kaska tribes from the north, whom the Hittites had never fully subdued, might have taken advantage of the chaos to sack Hattusa itself. Some archaeological levels at Hattusa show signs of violent destruction, though intriguingly, it appears the royal palace may have been deliberately cleared out, and the city partly evacuated before the final burning. Perhaps the last king fled, taking the treasury and as many people as he could before invaders or desperate locals set the city aflame. Within a few years, the Hittite political structure disintegrated. While some descendants of the Hittites survived in small Neo-Hittite city-states in Syria, like Carchemish, for a few centuries more, the empire's heartland in Anatolia fell into a dark age. Writing vanished. Indeed, the very use of the Hittite cuneiform script disappeared completely. The grand temples fell to ruin, and the knowledge of the Hittite language, history, and gods was forgotten. For over 3,000 years, the Hittites were essentially unknown to the world, until archaeologists in the early 20th century excavated Hattusa and deciphered those clay tablets, resurrecting their story. It's humbling to stand amid the tumbled cyclopean stones at Hattusa's great temple courtyard, where once the storm god of Hatti was honored with lavish offerings. Now weeds push through the paving stones, and only the whisper of the Anatolian wind and the cry of an eagle break the silence. The land of 1,000 gods, as the Hittites called their realm, is today a land of ghostly memories. One can place a hand on the ancient stone lions of the gate and feel the coolness of the past, imagining the bustle of merchants and soldiers that once passed between these guardians. The abrupt end of the Hittites is a poignant reminder of how even a dominant empire, with kings and scribes and treaties, can swiftly crumble into oblivion, leaving behind only enigmatic clay tablets and weathered walls. Yet their legacy lives on in unexpected ways. The very peace treaty they signed with Egypt in 12159 BCE is often cited as the oldest in history, and their legal and political ideas trickle down to successor cultures. As night falls at Hattusa, you might envision the glow of torches from long ago, and hear in your drowsy mind a Hittite lullaby, or the distant echo of bronze shields clashing. But those echoes fade, and the stars above, the same stars the Hittites charted, now shine down on an empire turned to dust. The Hittites' tale was one of fiery collapse, where climate and invasions brought an empire low. Now we cross continents and leap forward in time to witness another grand kingdom's decline, one not by sudden catastrophe, but by a slow waning under changing skies and fortunes. We travel to the highlands of East Africa, where the kingdom of Aksum once stood as a beacon trade and faith. In the rugged highlands of northern Ethiopia, where the air is crisp and the hillsides are dotted with ancient terraced fields, lie the remnants of a once great African empire, Aksum, or Aksum. The kingdom of Aksum was a trading powerhouse that thrived from roughly the 1st century AD into the 7th century AD, commanding the crossroads of commerce between Africa, Arabia, and the Greco-Roman world. The Aksumites left behind dramatic monuments that still awe visitors and locals alike, enormous carved obelisks, known as stelae, that tower into the sky. These stelae, some over 20 meters tall and weighing hundreds of tons, were erected without mortar or modern machinery, likely to mark the tombs of Aksum's kings. Walking in the Aksum stele field feels like standing among giant stone fingers reaching for the heavens. One fallen giant, the Great Stele, would have stood over 30 meters high had it not cracked and toppled in antiquity. Another, a 24-meter stele, was looted to Italy in the 20th century and returned in 2005, re-erected to once again pierce the Ethiopian sky. These monuments bespeak a civilization of great engineering skill and deep spiritual or funerary customs. At its zenith, around the 4th–6th centuries AD, Aksum was considered by some contemporary scholars to be one of the world's 4 great powers alongside Rome or Byzantium, Persia, and China. The city of Aksum itself, near today's Aksum town in Tigray, Ethiopia, may have housed 20,000 or more people, making it one of the largest cities in sub-Saharan Africa of its time. Its markets bustled with traders dealing in gold and ivory, Aksum's 2 most lucrative exports. From the African interior came ivory, rhinoceros horn, tortoise shell, and gold nuggets, which Aksumite merchants would trade to the Red Sea ports, like Adulis on the Eritrean coast. In return, they received spices from India, silk from China, glassware and wine from the Mediterranean. Aksum even minted its own currency, one of the few ancient African states to do so, striking gold, silver, and bronze coins bearing the profile of its kings. These coins, some inscribed with the title King of Kings in Greek, have been found as far away as India, attesting to Aksum's far-flung connections. A defining moment in Aksum's history was its conversion to Christianity. In the mid-4th century, around 3027 AD, King Ezana of Aksum embraced Christianity, making Aksum one of the earliest official Christian kingdoms in the world. To this day, Ethiopia's church traces its roots to this event. Ezana's stele, a stone slab inscription, even records his victories and his new faith. The symbol of the cross replaced the disc and crescent on Aksum's coins after conversion. The ruins of 4th century churches and the continuation of Christian tradition in the region speak to the lasting impact of this change. One can imagine the royal court at Aksum, the king and nobles listening to scriptures, perhaps brought by Syrian missionaries like Frumentius, under the bright African sun, as they decided to forsake old gods for the new faith. Aksum reached a peak of influence by the 6th century. Its navy and armies were strong enough to intervene across the Red Sea. Aksumite kings conquered parts of Yemen, including the Himyarite kingdom, around 525 AD, establishing a presence in southern Arabia. The empire was truly transcontinental for a brief time. However, it is here that the seeds of decline began to take root. In the later 6th century, Persian forces, the Sasanian Empire, pushed Aksum out of Yemen. The loss of South Arabian territories was a blow to prestige and perhaps to trade revenues. More critically, the rise of Islam in the 7th century dramatically altered regional dynamics. Islamic caliphates rapidly took control of Egypt, the Levant, and Arabia, the very trade network Aksum depended on. Suddenly, Aksum found itself somewhat isolated, cut off from its trading partners by the new Islamic Empire, which preferred its own emerging trade routes. Environmental factors also played a major role in Aksum's decline. The Aksumites had prospered in part due to the fertile highlands and stable climate of their region. But evidence suggests that by the 6th–7th centuries, the environment was under strain. Pollen data and other studies indicate overuse of land. Perhaps too many forests were cleared for agriculture or fuel, leading to soil erosion. Climate shifts may have brought more irregular rainfall or even droughts, straining the agricultural base. As harvests waned, supporting a large urban population became harder. We also hear of the movement of the Beja people, nomadic herders, who encroached on Aksum's territory from the north around this time. Their migration and grazing may have further disrupted Aksum's control of outlying areas and trade routes. By the mid-7th century, Aksum's golden age was ending. The capital city, Aksum, saw a decline. Monumental buildings ceased. Sometime after 630 AD, and possibly by 8th century, the political center of the kingdom shifted. Later Ethiopian chronicles suggest a move of the capital into the mountains, to places like Kuba, or eventually to Lalibela, under the Agaw-Azagwe dynasty. In essence, the old urban center was largely abandoned. The once bustling royal compounds fell quiet, and many of the mighty stelae toppled or were deliberately pulled down, perhaps during later turmoil or in an effort to erase the old royal tombs. By 800 AD, Aksum as a significant power was a memory. The kingdom fragmented into smaller entities. The torch of Ethiopian civilization would later be carried by new dynasties and kingdoms, but Aksum's prominence was gone. Yet Aksum was not forgotten locally. The Church of St. Mary of Zion in Aksum, in later rebuilt form, continued as a spiritual heart of Ethiopian Christianity, and legends like that of the Ark of the Covenant being kept at Aksum persisted. When you visit Aksum today, you can still see rough stone foundations of palaces like the suspected ruins of King Caleb's palace, carved thrones, and tall stelae casting long shadows at dawn. Some stelae stand perfectly upright, others lie in massive broken pieces on the ground, covered in lichen. The site has an atmosphere of serene abandonment. Villagers lead goats through the field, and children play among the fallen stones that once commemorated kings. The decline of Aksum was gradual, a twilight rather than an explosion. It reminds us that civilizations can fade away, not only through violence, but through slow shifts of climate, trade, and culture. In the quiet hours of early night, one might picture Aksum in its prime, torchlights flickering on the faces of tall obelisks, priests chanting in gaze, diplomats from distant lands arriving with exotic gifts. Then imagine that light slowly dimming, year by year, until only moonlight bathes the great stones. The empire of Aksum became a ghost, but its spirit endures in Ethiopia's cultural memory and in the monuments left behind, enduring stone testaments to a chapter of African history that once shone brightly, and then, inevitably, passed into shadow. We now leave the Ethiopian highlands and travel back in time and over sea to the dawn of European civilization. In the blue waters of the Aegean, the island of Crete holds secrets of a people whose vibrant culture fell prey to natural catastrophe and foreign invasion. We turn to the Minoans of Crete, a civilization of art and myth that collapsed amidst fire and ash. On the island of Crete, more than 3,500 years ago, a sophisticated civilization flourished that we now call the Minoans, after the mythical King Minos. The Minoans are often regarded as Europe's first advanced civilization, and their society, 2000 to 1450 BCE, was marked by beautiful art, monumental architecture, and extensive trade networks. The Minoans built sprawling palace complexes at places like Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros. These palaces weren't quite like the fortified castles of later ages. Instead, they were open, labyrinthine complexes of halls, courtyards, and storerooms, more ceremonial and administrative centers than military strongholds. The most famous is Knossos, near modern Heraklion. According to legend, Knossos was the seat of King Minos and home to the labyrinth that imprisoned the half-man, half-bull Minotaur. Wandering the site of Knossos today, one can see why the myth of a labyrinth arose. The layout is a maze of chambers and corridors. Sir Arthur Evans, the archaeologist who excavated Knossos in the early 1900s, even named the culture Minoan after the Minos of legend. The Minoans are remembered for their art, vibrant frescoes that adorned palace walls, depicting scenes of nature, ritual, and daily life. In these frescoes we see graceful figures in colorful skirts and kilts, with narrow waists and confident poses. One famous image shows youths engaging in bull leaping, a sport or ritual where participants would grab a charging bull by the horns and flip over its back. This startling portrayal captures both the athleticism and perhaps religious significance of bulls in Minoan culture. Indeed, the bull and the labrys double-headed axe were important symbols, possibly connected to worship. The Minoans also crafted elegant pottery, such as the marine-style vases painted with octopuses. An example is the octopus vase from Palais Castro, and delicate gold jewelry. Unlike the contemporary civilizations of Egypt or Mesopotamia, the Minoans left behind no grand carved victory stelae or kingly statues. Much of what we infer about them comes from their art and the ruins of their architecture. One of the enduring mysteries of the Minoans is their undeciphered script, known as Linear A. They used this script to record economic transactions on clay tablets, but despite decades of effort, modern scholars have not cracked the code. It likely encodes a language unrelated to later Greek. So, like the Indus script, Linear A remains an eloquent silence. The Minoans' own words are locked away, and we cannot hear their voices directly. For hundreds of years, the Minoans dominated the Aegean. They established trade outposts or contacts as far afield as the Cycladic Islands, Cyprus, the Levant, and Egypt. Minoan artifacts, especially their pottery, are found throughout the eastern Mediterranean, showing that they were consummate seafarers, spreading their goods and perhaps cultural influence widely. The Greeks of later eras remembered Crete in their myths as a land of skill and cunning, home not only to King Minos, but also Daedalus, the legendary craftsman who built the labyrinth, and Icarus, and a place visited by gods like Zeus in the guise of a bull. Then, sometime around 1450 BCE, the Minoan civilization suffered a devastating blow. Archaeology reveals that around that date, most of the Minoan palaces, except Knossos, were destroyed or abandoned, often with signs of violent destruction and fire. The Grand Palace of Knossos itself, which survived that initial wave, ultimately fell and was abandoned a couple of generations later, by around 1375 BCE, ending the Minoan era for good. What happened? The fall of the Minoans appears to have been a combination of natural disaster and human conquest. A few centuries earlier, around 1600 BCE, the Minoans endured one of the greatest natural cataclysms in ancient history, the eruption of Thera, the volcano on the island, now known as Santorini. This eruption was colossal, rated 7 on the volcanic explosivity index, ejecting an immense plume of ash and likely causing tsunamis that pummeled the coasts of Crete. The thriving Minoan town of Akrotiri on Thera was completely buried in pumice and ash, preserved like a Bronze Age Pompeii. Strikingly, on Crete, none of the main palaces show ash from Thera, indicating they were out of the direct fallout zone, and for a time after the eruption, the Minoans continued on, even undertaking new building projects. However, the indirect effects of the eruption, possible climate cooling, disrupted trade, coastal damage from tsunamis, might have weakened Minoan society over the ensuing decades. Ultimately, about 50 years after Thera's eruption, the palaces were destroyed in a wave of violence. Many scholars believe that this was the result of Mycenaean Greeks from mainland Greece invading Crete. At sites like Knossos, archaeologists noticed something intriguing. The palace at Knossos was damaged around 1450 BCE, but then reoccupied and some parts rebuilt, now with artifacts showing a mix of Minoan and Mycenaean characteristics. The administrative tablets in Linear A give way to tablets in Linear B, a script used by Mycenaeans, which we can read. It encodes an early form of Greek. The Linear B tablets from Knossos speak of Greek gods and record inventories in Greek language, suggesting that after the destruction, the palace was used by Greek-speaking rulers. Essentially, Mycenaeans took over Knossos and perhaps ruled as a new elite for several decades. Whether this invasion was a swift military conquest or a more gradual infiltration of power is debated, but the end result was that native Minoan culture was supplanted. By 1300 BCE, Crete was essentially a Mycenaean province, and the unique features of Minoan civilization faded into the Pan-Aegean Bronze Age culture of the time. As a result of these events, the Minoans pass almost into legend. By the time classical Greeks wrote their histories, the memory of a great Cretan civilization survived only in mythic garb: the labyrinth, the Minotaur, the tales of King Minos' naval empire. For centuries, the ruins on Crete were unexplained, and it wasn't until Arthur Evans's excavations in the early 20th century that the Minoans resurfaced from myth into historical reality. Today, as you walk through the reconstructed areas of Knossos, past the red columns and frescoed throne, partially restored by Evans's imagination, you can almost see the vibrant life that once filled these spaces. Priests or priestesses in flowing dresses performing rituals in the central court, acrobats leaping over bulls, artisans carving seal stones, merchants arriving with goods from foreign lands. Then imagine the turmoil of the collapse. Perhaps earthquakes. Crete is seismically active, rattling the island, fires breaking out in storerooms, or perhaps foreign warriors advancing through palace gates, swords drawn. The end, when it came, left the palaces in charred disarray. In some places, valuable objects were left behind, never reclaimed, suggesting the population fled or was displaced. What followed was a true dark age for Crete, as it fell under Mycenaean control, and then, around 1200 BCE, the Mycenaeans themselves fell, a story we are about to tell. The lights went out on the grandeur of the Bronze Age in the Aegean. In the quiet of a Cretan night, it's possible to feel the ghosts of the Minoans. The Aegean breeze blows gently over the ruins, carrying the salt scent of the sea. The same moon that once shone on Minoan festivities now casts a silvery light on broken columns. There's a poignancy in how completely their world vanished, even their language lost, their stories untold. Yet their artistry and achievements whisper to us across the ages. As our eyes grow heavy, we may dream of the sound of distant lyres and flutes wafting from a palace courtyard, of dancers and bulls, and the laughter of a people who lived long ago under the Cretan sun, before their chapter quietly closed. The Minoans left behind magnificent ruins and tantalizing myths. Even as they fell, a new power was rising on the Greek mainland. Now we shift our gaze to that mainland and the civilization that inherited the Minoans' mantle. only to perish in the same sweeping collapse that ended the Bronze Age. Enter the world of the Mycenaeans, the age of Agamemnon and the Trojan War, and witness how it too crumbled into darkness. In the imaginations of later generations, the Mycenaeans were the stuff of epic. This late Bronze Age civilization of mainland Greece, circa 1600–1100 BCE, is the backdrop for Homer's tales of the Trojan War and heroes like Agamemnon, Menelaus, and Achilles. The Mycenaeans themselves left no literary epics, but they did leave imposing citadels, rich tombs, and a script that we can read, Linear B, an early form of Greek used for palace record-keeping. At their height, 1400–100 BC, the Mycenaean Greeks were the lords of the Aegean. They built citadels on hilltops, each ruled by a one-axe king, at places like Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, Thebes, and Athens. The citadel of Mycenae in Argolis, southern Greece, gives the entire culture its name. Even in ruin, Mycenae is awe-inspiring. Its famous lion gate still stands, 2 lions carved in relief above a massive stone lintel, guarding the entrance. The walls of Mycenae and other sites like Tiryns are made of huge limestone boulders, so large that later Greeks thought giants, the Cyclopes, built them, hence the term Cyclopean walls. Passing through the Lion Gate, you step into a realm that around 112–50 BCE was bustling with armored soldiers, scribes tallying tributes, artisans working gold and bronze, and chariots clattering out for war or hunting. The Mycenaeans were heirs to the Minoans in some ways. They adopted the Linear A script and adapted it into Linear B for their own Greek language. They took on aspects of Minoan art and religion, but they were also more overtly martial. They buried their nobles in shaft graves, and later in monumental tholos tombs, beehive-shaped underground tombs lined with stone. One such tomb at Mycenae, often called the Treasury of Atreus, still impresses with its corbelled dome over 13 meters high. In these graves, Mycenaean elites were interred with masks of gold, one of which Heinrich Schliemann dubbed the Mask of Agamemnon when he discovered it in the 19th century. Gilt weapons and ornate jewelry, signs of a warrior aristocracy. The Mycenaean economy was centralized and bureaucratic. Tablets in their palace archives record rations for workers, inventory of chariots and armor, and offerings to gods. They traded widely. Mycenaean pottery is found in Egypt and the Levant, and they likely hired themselves out as mercenaries or traders abroad. They perhaps also conducted raids. Some speculate that tales of sea peoples might have included Mycenaean adventurers. Yet, around 120 BCE, this vibrant Mycenaean world came crashing down. In site after site, archaeologists have uncovered destruction layers or abandonment around that date. Pylos' palace burnt to the ground, its Linear B tablets accidentally baked and preserved by the fire. Mycenae's houses torched, Tiryns damaged, Thebes and others experiencing calamity. Within a few decades, the great palace centers were no more. The population of Greece plummeted. Literacy was lost, Linear B writing disappears entirely, and the region entered a dark age that would last centuries. The very knowledge of building in cut stone or organizing large states vanished. When Greeks re-emerge in the historical record around 800 BCE, they are living in small villages, and even the memory of the Mycenaeans survives only in oral myth. What caused such a complete collapse? This is part of the broader Late Bronze Age collapse circa 1200 BCE. That affected many lands. As with the Hittites, a confluence of factors is likely. Mycenaean Greece of the 13th century BCE was under stress from multiple fronts. Some evidence points to internal strife, perhaps civil wars or uprisings. The fortification walls at sites like Mycenae were extended and strengthened in their final years, hinting at increased fear of attack, maybe not only from foreigners but rival Greek kingdoms. Some Linear B tablets ominously list watchers at the coast, suggesting the palaces were concerned about seaborne invaders or pirates. And indeed, the mysterious sea peoples ravaged the eastern Mediterranean around this time. Coinciding with these events, could some of those raiders have struck Greece or its trade routes? Possibly. Moreover, climate evidence, like from buried pollen and lake sediments, indicates that around 100 BCE a series of droughts afflicted the eastern Mediterranean. For agrarian societies already operating near the margin, a few bad harvests could incite famine and social chaos. Famine may have weakened the bonds holding the palatial economies together. Hungry populations can rebel or migrate. We know from later Greek traditions that populations did indeed move during this unsettled period. Tribes like the Dorians are said to have migrated into southern Greece, possibly pushed by chain reactions of upheaval. Archaeology shows new styles of pottery and weapons emerging after the collapse, suggesting new groups or at least new cultural influences. The fall of palaces would have also meant the collapse of the complex redistributive economy. Without the palace, specialist craftsmen lost patronage, and trades that required large organization, like bronze smelting that needs imported tin, dwindled. There's even a hint of epidemic. Skeletons from some final Bronze Age contexts show signs of stress and possible disease, though that is hard to ascertain. Likely the Mycenaeans were hit by all these troubles at once: famine, war, rebellion, migration. As one archaeologist phrased it, it was a systems collapse. The interlinked nature of Bronze Age civilization meant that once a few key supports fell, the whole edifice came down, and so the house of Atreus fell. By 1100 BCE, Greece was a patchwork of small villages. Writing was forgotten. No more linear B-lists of chariots or wine. The beautiful wall paintings ceased. The tholos tombs were no longer built. To later Greeks, the age of those massive citadels and gold masks was a lost heroic age. Poets sang of it in epic poems, glamorizing and distorting the memory. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are thought to encode some echoes of Mycenaean times, passed down orally, but the actual knowledge, how to build a 3-story palace or forge a suit of bronze armor in Mycenaean style, was gone. Only around the 8th century BCE did Greece begin to recover, reinventing writing with the alphabet and slowly rebuilding urban life, never realizing fully that they were heirs to a fallen civilization that had peaked 500 years before. Visiting the ruins of Mycenae or Pylos, the latter with its Megaron Hall where King Nestor might have held court, one feels a tinge of melancholy amid the stones. At Mycenae, stand inside the treasury of Atreus' tomb for a moment. The corbelled dome still intact overhead, its apex open to the sky. The acoustics make even a quiet hum resonate. It's easy to imagine a funeral procession of Mycenaeans, bearing a noble's body with gold funeral mask into this chamber, lit by flickering torches, the laments echoing off the walls. Now there is only silence and the occasional drip of water. Outside, the citadel's collapsed walls and burnt debris speak to that day of doom when Mycenae met its end. The site of Pylos, Palace of Nestor, has a different feel, overlooking the Bay of Novarino. It was torched around 180 BCE. And one can see the outlines of the palace rooms and even a bathtub thought to be Nestor's bath. In those final moments, someone hurriedly scribbled a last linear B tablet, perhaps an inventory of weapons as invaders approached, and then the fire overtook them. That tablet was found, half-baked by the flames. These vignettes draw a picture of an abrupt, violent end. Ultimately, the Mycenaean collapse, like the Hittite, left behind a dark age. To close our eyes and think of Greece in 1000 BCE is to imagine a simpler, more primitive scene compared to the cosmopolitan palaces of a few centuries earlier. But myth and oral tradition kept faint embers of the memory alive, enough that when we read Homer or stand at Mycenae, we feel the presence of those heroes and their world. As we drift in thought, perhaps the faint notes of a lyre or the clatter of hooves echo in the distance, but they fade into the night. The palaces are dark, their stones cold, and the age of the Mycenaeans lives only in dreams. We have now witnessed the falls of Bronze Age kingdoms and classical trade empires. For our final story in this segment, we journey to a time far earlier, before any of the civilizations we've discussed, to an ancient hill in Anatolia. There at Göbekli Tepe, a monumental site from the Stone Age, was built and abandoned long before the advent of cities, challenging our understanding of how civilization itself began. before cities, before writing, before agriculture, as we know it. Over 10,000 years ago, humans gathered on a hilltop in what is now southeastern Turkey to erect something utterly extraordinary. The site is called Göbekli Tepe, and it is often cited as the world's oldest known temple complex. Here, around 900 and 600 BCE, nearly 12,000 years before the present, people who still lived by hunting and foraging, not farming, quarried and carved immense T-shaped stone pillars, then raised them upright in circular enclosures. Each pillar can stand up to 5 or 6 meters tall and weigh 7 to 10 tons. They are adorned with exquisite carvings of animals, fierce lions, leaping gazelles, snarling wild boar, cranes and vultures stretching their wings, even spiders and abstract symbols. The artistry is fluid and confident, clearly the work of skilled craftspeople. Some pillars bear stylized arms and hands, suggesting they represent stylized humanoid figures, perhaps ancient deities or mythical ancestors. All of this, created in stone so early in human history, when our ancestors were just transitioning out of the last ice age, has revolutionized archaeologists' understanding of that era. Göbekli Tepe sits on a barren knoll. Its name means potbelly hill. For millennia, it just appeared as a series of small mounds. Locals thought it was an ancient burial ground, or just natural terrain. In the 1990s, when excavations began under German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, the true significance of the site emerged, as layer after layer of finely crafted stone pillars came to light. Archaeologists realized they were dealing with something unprecedentedly old and complex. Megalithic architecture from a time usually associated with nomadic bands. This challenged the long-held view that organized religion and monumental architecture came after agriculture had produced surplus food. Here at Göbekli Tepe, it seems, a spiritual or communal vision, possibly of ritual sanctuaries, came first, and might have actually spurred the development of farming in the region. Indeed, the surrounding area is where some of the earliest evidence of domesticated wheat has been found, dated not long after Göbekli Tepe's active phase. Perhaps groups congregated here for rituals, feasts, and gatherings, requiring ample food, which encouraged the tending of wild grains and herds. The site itself was constructed in phases. The earliest enclosures, circa 9600–8800 BCE, are the most impressive, large circles, 10 to 30 meters across, of T-pillars, linked by low stone walls. Two taller pillars stand in the center of each circle, like central monoliths, encircled by slightly smaller pillars facing them. It's thought that ceremonies were held in these stone circles under the open sky, though some pillars might have supported roofs of perishable materials. The purpose remains speculative. No obvious domestic remains like cooking hearths or trash pits have been found, so it seems purely a ceremonial site, not a village. Perhaps different clans or bands met here on special occasions, to worship, to exchange goods or brides, to socialize, to share stories. One carving famously shows a headless human figure beside a vulture, which some interpret in light of ritual excarnation, exposing bodies for vultures, a practice known in some early cultures, tying into beliefs in death and the spirit world. The very scope of coordination to build Göbekli Tepe is astounding, organizing hundreds of people to quarry and transport multi-ton stones, likely using rollers or ropes, to carve intricate reliefs with flint tools, and to assemble these structures. All implies an advanced social structure and shared purpose at a time long before kings or cities. And then, perhaps even more mysteriously, Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. After some centuries of use, the people of that era filled in the circular enclosures with dirt, rubble, and refuse, entombing the standing pillars around 8000 BC. They then built smaller, cruder structures on top, and eventually abandoned the site altogether. Why would they bury their monumental sanctuaries? Was it an act of ritual closure, a way to respectfully decommission a sacred space? Or perhaps the socio-religious focus shifted elsewhere? Maybe as true village life and farming took off, new rituals in actual settlements replaced the old hilltop gatherings. In any case, the people who made Göbekli Tepe vanish from history except for this legacy. We don't know what they called themselves or what language they spoke. By 7000 BCE, the hill was quiet, and soon nature concealed the marvel, preserving it beneath until our time. For thousands of years thereafter, Göbekli Tepe lay forgotten under its self-created mound. The nearby communities evolved, agriculture spread, and by the time writing was invented, much later, Göbekli Tepe's creators were as mythical as gods. Only now, in the 21st century, are we truly uncovering this place and grappling with its significance. To visit Göbekli Tepe today is to feel you are on the threshold of deep human memory. The pillars stand under a protective canopy, their carvings still sharp after 11,000 years. Touching the limestone, though usually not permitted to touch, one can feel the texture that Stone Age hands once felt as they chiseled out a fox or leopard. The quiet on the hill, with gentle breezes blowing across sun-bleached grass, encourages contemplation. This was a site of perhaps profound spiritual meaning, a mountain of revelation for early humans. Picture a clear pre-dawn at Göbekli Tepe 10,000 years ago. Torches flicker, illuminating pillars as people gather. As the eastern sky brightens, maybe the first rays of sunlight strike between the twin central pillars of an enclosure. Was it a line to the solstice, or a star? Perhaps chants begin. Drums beat softly. The carved animals around seem to dance in the firelight's flicker. Then, as daylight grows, the rituals conclude and feasting commences. Roasting game meat, sharing brewed drinks, a celebration of life, community, and the spirit world that binds them. Such scenes, though speculative, remind us that the builders of Göbekli Tepe were fully human in their hopes and fears, even if their ways were so different. By nightfall now, Göbekli Tepe stands deserted except for archaeologists' tools. The stars that once guided those ancient ceremonies sparkle overhead. The site's discovery has in a sense resurrected those Stone Age people's legacy, giving them a voice without words. They speak through stone, saying, "We too sought meaning in the cosmos. We too built and dreamed." And as we conclude this second segment, reflecting on the Hittites, Aksumites, Minoans, Mycenaeans, and even the nameless Göbekli Tepe builders, a gentle realization dawns. All things have their time. Each of these cultures rose, shone brightly, and then, whether by fire or famine, or the slow drift of time, fell into stillness. But in that stillness, they left seeds for the future. Ideas, genes, stories, and ruins, from which later peoples, and we ourselves, draw knowledge and inspiration. Good night.